Yeah, guidance on learning more about Israel Palestine. It's almost every Christian has embedded presuppositions about conflicts in the Middle East and specifically Israel Palestine that they have simply absorbed, right? We all have. We all um we're fish swimming in a pond, and that's just the way it goes. So I think we have to work. If you're like, man, I have some opinions about this. I have some perspective, but I'm not sure where I got that. I would like to learn more. I think you have to come to a place of trying your best to just come to a neutral place and begin from the ground up. Okay, I'm actually going to try to build what I think from reading some things without trying to assume a certain position is correct. It took me a while to even get there. I remember when I think the first time I had an actual, like, legitimate conversation with somebody, a Palestinian who grew up in the West Bank, it was only, maybe a couple 3 years ago, maybe? I had talked to some before, but it was just kind of like I wasn't even trying to understand where people are coming from, but the first time I was actually trying to understand where he's coming from, and even then, though, looking back now, I was like, I still had a lot of presuppositions that were filtering what he was saying. Like, he'd say something, if it didn't kind of resonate with the perspective I grew up with, I was kinda like, "Yeah, that can't be true." Like, I would just kinda dismiss it out of hand. So, it wasn't until I got to a place where I said, "You know what? I actually have not really looked into this from just a kind of research inquisitive perspective." So I think you have to almost, before you even start studying, you have to do some psychological evaluation and try to say, okay, how much of my passion, my viewpoint is based on kind of unbiased research into this conversation. So I've spent the last year doing a lot of that and trying to read stuff on different sides of this conversation, and truly try to read them in good faith. One of There's a series of, well, if you're not familiar with the new historians, there was a for long. You can actually look at the Wikipedia article, "New Historians," and it actually gives you a good overview of kind of the players, kind of what it is. But as I understand it, there was kind of a release of unfirst, a new a bunch of information that wasn't available to the public that became available in, I think, the late 70s, early 80s. A lot of Israeli historians waded through this and realized that this new information that came out had had caused a lot of historians to got to rethink the history of Israel Palestine. And so some of Benny Morris was one of the leaders of this. He's kind of shifted his perspective over the years, but some of his early work represents that. Elon Pape was one of the first people I read on this. The ethnic cleansing of Palestine was I call it a good book. It would be kind of weird. It's a devastating book. That book was. I mean, I didn't know what to do after I read that book. I was kind of horrified at how a lot of the things that were talked about in that book, I've just never heard of before. And it's very, you'll also, let me say this, when you start doing research, if somebody's entrenched on either side of the debate, quite honestly, and they see you reading something that disagrees with their view, they will just say, "Oh, that's been discredited. Oh, that scholar has been critiqued. Oh, that," and they'll send you maybe an article written by an activist on the other side that will call that book, names or whatever. So you have to. So as an author, every book somebody writes is going to be critiqued by somebody somewhere. It doesn't mean that critique is legit. So you have to almost like lay aside those kind of like hit pieces or whatever, and just you have to read stuff and just look at their sources, fact check their sources, find corroborative evidence. Are they citing original sources? Like Elon Pape, I mean, he literally is quoting from Ben Gurion's diary throughout, saying this was what Ben Gurion was saying during the 47-48, the Nakba, or the War of Independence, depending on what side you're on, is what they call it. So, yeah, Elon Pape's Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine. There's another. I've got a few books here. This one is really, really good. The 100 Years War on Palestine Rashid Khalidi. He's Palestinian. Okay, so some people were like, well, we can't trust him. He's Palestinian. It's like, well, wait a minute, but you're reading people by Israelis and you trust, so like you have to, again, you have to leave aside that critique. And somebody's like, well, no, I heard he's been discredited. Well, he's this ethnicity, so um, unbiased. What Khalidi argues in this book, and he's not really even, he just gives a history. And I think he's, as far as I have corroborated his arguments with other sources, I think it's very accurate. Not, I mean, everybody's gonna have mistakes somewhere, but I think he's very fair with showing different sides of the conflict. But it gives you a good overview, and he comes from a family that was really deep into the history too. So he's giving a lot of firsthand stuff on it. I'm reading this book right now, The Israel Lobby, by John Mersheimer and Stephen Walt. John Mersheimer has been, a University of Chicago professor, world-renowned scholar of American foreign policy, and the book is absolutely incredible. It has over 1,200 footnotes, meticulously researched. Again, loads and loads and loads of original research. You can go. Whenever I read a book, I always go to the footnotes, and I don't know if you can see that, but like, I just want to see where you're getting your sources from. And you can see that everything he said is so meticulously documented. And I love that, because if he says something, I'm like, well, I don't know, that sounds a little outrageous. Well, he's got it all footnoted, so I can go and chase down what this person said, where, so that's the way I like to do research. I typically don't buy anything until I really look into it. And I've just found, and I've been following Mersheimer for over a year now, and I find him to be incredibly accurate in what he says. Again, maybe not perfect, but whenever I do kind of cross-check something he's saying, most often it turns out to be accurate. And chapter 2 of this book, where he kind of gives a history of Israel Palestine, is very, very, very good. Here's one of Elon Pape's books, 10 Myths About Israel. So yeah, Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine is the first one I read. This one is kind of shorter and has a lot of kind of addresses some key issues in a concise way. This is another devastating book. It's not directly related to Israel Palestine, but it just kind of unpacks the financial incentive of the American military industrial complex. And I do think, and Mersheimer talks a lot about this as well, that is a key, I would say frightening, honestly, piece to this conversation as well. You can't separate America's support for the state, almost nearly unconditional support for the nation of Israel, without understanding the military industrial complex. I have other books here. I really liked, from a Christian perspective, Mitri Raheb's, is that how you say it? Is it Raheb? Faith in the Face of Empire. It's a lot of theology, some politics, and he blends it together. And I just think it's a really powerful book. Of course, somebody maybe on the other side is going to say, well, he's Palestinian, therefore you can't trust him, or I don't know what they would say. Sometimes it might sound a little racist, but I don't think people mean it that way. But yeah, the thing is, like, I guess few people come from a neutral place in this conversation. But again, a lot of what Rahib says, and Khalidi, again, Palestinian authors, you can go read like Israeli new historians, and it's corroborated. So you can't say, well, it's just what Palestinians are talking about. There's some really good, I would say the best journalism that is done from a non-partisan perspective comes from probably one of my favorite news outlets, Breaking Points, with Crystal Ball. That's her name. She's awesome. And I'm forgetting the guy's name. Anyway, I can't believe I forgot his name. I listen to him like almost every day. Anyway, he's right-leaning, she's left-leaning. Both are pretty anti-partisan. Like, they both rip on both political parties, So like, I've been listening to them for years and years. Well, I'm sorry, they've only been around for like 3 years. I've been listening to them for hours and hours and hours and hours. I still couldn't tell you who they're going to vote for, literally, because they just look at things from a very critical eye, and they are staunchly on the side sympathetic with the Palestinian cause. So, um, oh yes, Sagar and Jetty is the I just remember Sagar and Jetty is the other commentator there. Other people I really like, journalists like Matt Taibbi, Aaron Mate. There's Ryan Graham also is with Breaking Points. He actually is doing his other, I think, a drop site news. He started. These are people that again they are. I don't know who any of these people are going to vote for because they treat the political polarization extremely fairly. They're very well researched in what they say. They've been in this for a long time, and all of them are extremely critical of the way the state of Israel has been operating, and I have learned just a ton from them. So again, like if you go to like Al Jazeera or some of these, very entrenched pro-Palestinian um, journalistic sites, I personally, I think they do good work. But sometimes in a conversation, if it seems like you're drawing on a very one-sided or Mondo Weiss or the gray zone, people might say, well, those are all biased sources. Um, Maybe they are. I think a lot of those are actually doing good journalism, but I think this is where Breaking Points is good because they're really not on any kind of political side. But yeah. So those are some sources. I think you have to be in a place psychologically where you are truly trying to understand this complex conversation, where you get different sides thrown at you. You need to get in a place where you're genuinely wanting to go where the evidence leads. And I can't say I've done that perfectly for sure, but I've tried to. I See. I guess for me too, I don't because the conversation is so binary. Are you the way some people make it sound like either you're like, are you pro Israel or pro Hamas? I'm like, well, I'm pro. We shouldn't kill children and women. Like, if your sense of justice requires you to bomb a bunch of innocent civilians, then I would question your sense of justice, the morality of that. And I don't think that's controversial. I don't think Jesus would be shocked at that. Um, so I'm on the side of civilians getting caught up in the middle of this conflict where people are trying to use violence and power to achieve justice. And the overwhelming majority of people are the victims of that. And I'm on the side of the innocent civilians and victims. And so yeah. So for me, I want to maybe help people think past this kind of binary. Which side are you on? Who's the good guy? Who's the bad guy? Um, and try to open up our minds to a more kingdom-minded perspective on how we should think through this obviously tragic situation that's happening in Israel Palestine.